In Japan, a tragedy on a runway at Haneda Airport in Tokyo has left 5 dead who were Coast Guards trying to help save lives in earthquake-struck parts of Japan further west. It's a miracle because on the larger plane that was coming in to land, an Airbus A350, all 379 passengers and crew on board managed to escape. And I call it a miracle because when you see video of the ball of flames that erupted as the 2 planes struck and the ensuing fire, you just wonder how on earth an evacuation could have occurred. The video filmed by one of the people on board the Airbus shows the cabin filling with smoke as passengers shout. This afternoon, the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida praised the crew members who died as a result of the collision.
この方々は被災地被災者のために高い使命感
These people had carried out their jobs with a strong sense of duty, he said. This is a very unfortunate incident, and I offer my sincere condolences while expressing my respect and gratitude for their duty. Well, Josh Kultas was at the airport, Haneda Airport, to collect a friend and describe the atmosphere in the terminal.
It was pretty scary. Like the whole airport kind of just froze, and it was shocking because my friend could have been on that plane. Luckily, they weren't. But right after the earthquakes yesterday and the tsunami, it's quite a scary start to 2024 in Japan. Most of the Shinkansen, the bullet trains, they're all delayed, but they're coming back because the earthquakes have calmed down. And so everyone's looking at alternative ways of transport of getting home, but it's pretty difficult because it's all filling up. You can imagine the amount of people that are now unable to get home or go to where they need to go and are now going to look for other forms of transport.
Josh Kultas, who was at the airport when the crash occurred. Well, it's the kind of accident that aviation systems are designed to avoid. I spoke to Doug McLean, who has nearly 40 years' experience of air traffic control, including brief stints at the airports in Tokyo. He's now managing director of DKM Aviation Partners. I started by asking Doug how an on-ground collision could have occurred.
It's a breach of, I don't know how many different safety protocols and procedures that were in there to stop this happening, because it is an absolutely deadly place to have 2 airplanes together at the same time.
It is an incredibly busy airport, mostly domestic, Japanese domestic flights, some international flights, but mostly domestic flights. It's not the main international Tokyo airport. But, I mean, it's a well-run facility, presumably.
There should be a radar monitoring on the ground of where the airplanes are. There should be a physical procedure which, when the controller gives away the runway to a landing airplane or a departing airplane, it should be physically blocked in his display to say, don't allocate it to something else. So there are various methods and procedures to stop 2 airplanes. Normally, pilots are looking out the window, but we have the situation where it was obviously the airplane that was going on to the runway or was on the runway was on a very bright part of the airport, which is the landing threshold, which is very brightly lit. The landing crew may not have seen the airplane because it was obscured by the lights on the runway.
These ground collisions, when they have occurred in the past, have been horrific. The worst aviation disaster of all time, Tenerife, where 2 planes, one at speed on a runway, collide. Take us through the history of this.
The 350 evacuation justifies all the effort that goes into safety improvement and continuous safety improvement in aviation. To get over 350 passengers out of the airplane within a couple of minutes in a difficult position was really a testimony to not only the crew on board and the passengers doing their bit, but also the safety systems by the manufacturers that have been built in. If we go back to Tenerife and 40 odd years ago now, something like that, it absolutely shocked the world, the aviation world, that could happen. From that period onwards, certainly in my working period since then, there have been all sorts of procedural and technical equipment that have been brought in to improve safety, with a view to stopping runway incursions, as we call them, which is one airplane going onto the runway when it shouldn't be. There are all sorts of safeguards which have been built in over the last 40 years. But still, as you say, the American incidents in the last year or so, and the Central American one, proves that there are still mistakes that can happen in the system.
Is it a minute? Is it 2 minutes? You have to be able to empty these planes?
I believe they're aiming for 2 minutes. I've actually been there. I was fortunate enough to go on a training course with British Airways at one point where they were training their cabin crew. So I've experienced the evacuation as a passenger when those crew believe that they have to get everybody out in as short a time as possible. They absolutely give it their all, and you're well aware by the shouting, the direction, the very clear direction that's given to the passengers, leave everything behind.
But Doug, it's one thing doing it in a training context when you know you're doing it and you've braced yourself to do it, and you've got people like you sitting in the passenger seats acting out those roles. Completely different when you actually find yourself in a situation.
Some of the video that we've seen, the landing video where the passenger on the port side behind the engine was videoing and obviously alarmed to see smoke. And then we could see smoke in the cabin and we could see passengers beginning to stand up. Again, perhaps the discipline of the passengers on board was fantastic, guided by the crew. Hopefully nobody stopped to try and do anything because they were probably initially evacuating out of the front, both sides, and maybe on the port side, which means that people have to be orderly and very quick. It's a lesson to anybody who ever flies is if you ever are in an incident like that, follow the cabin crew instruction, leave your baggage, and probably leave your videoing behind.
Doug McLean there with years of experience in air traffic control on that crash at Haneda Airport in Tokyo.